those who missed the Kickstarter, or those who don't want to get into the PDF release of games, have been tormenting themselves, driving themselves mad, wondering what is inside the new volumes that represent what is perhaps the most lavish edition of Call of Cthulhu ever released by Chaosium. Call of Cthulhu 7th edition is stirring up a lot of discussion. People want to know what the game's like. How does it play? What's inside it? Well, this video will at least look at what's inside it. And as a backer, my choices were the hardcover release, and due to stretch goals, this came with pretty impressive slipcase. Now, what I've taken out here is the Keeper's screen. I haven't opened it yet. I was saving it for this video where we look at the core products that go along with it. So in the background you can see the field guide to Lovecraftian horrors, and you can see nameless horrors here, but we're not going to get into that. You can see them in the unboxing. The Keeper's screen, well, I've always felt that Chaosium has done good screens. This one, I can give you a hint, is no exception. In addition to the shrink wrap, this packet of many things is kept together by, well, like a dust jacket. And what we're seeing on top here, penned by some very familiar names, is a book of scenarios. And as I mentioned, Chaosium seems to do their screens very well. I was very pleased to see this full-on commercial release presentation of the booklet. Really wasn't expecting that. Now, underneath it is something else that I really appreciated. And that might seem odd, considering as it just looks like a couple of pieces of paper. But this booklet is the combined indices from both the Handbook and the Rulebook, which, once a person gets familiar with the game, may have less utility. But at the beginning, something of a godsend. And for a newcomer, I think it would retain its usefulness for quite a while. It's 22 pages of references for the Keeper. Now, the booklet itself is slightly glossy, and the paper is pretty good. Speaking of good paper, underneath this, poster-size maps. 3 of them. Let's start with the Arkham Map. The colors of it appeal to me quite a bit. Mainly decorative and inspirational, the map is also quite functional, especially as it has these 4 quarters of the town for you to zoom in on particularly interesting neighborhoods in this most Lovecraftian of communities. The maps are 4 full-page panels, folding up to be the size of a regular book. The next map we'll take a look at is of Lovecraft Country, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1922. Very helpful map to ground people in where many of Lovecraft's stories were set. This last map, the Great Old One's Dark Prize, is also designed for inspiration, covering all those places your investigators really should not go. Speaking of investigators, the next items inside the packet are character sheets. Slightly redesigned, but retaining the classic look and feel of the Call of Cthulhu character sheet. There's a lot of information on it. The skills are presented. There are boxes for each aspect of what you might use your character sheet for. Combat, or dealing with issues of sanity, or employing or losing magic points, as investigations worsen. The characteristics have spaces for the trait and your half and fifth values, and you'll note checkboxes alongside each of the skills. These are for noting experience points. So all the elements of the classic Call of Cthulhu sheet are here. Now the paper is very glossy, not unlike the pages of a magazine. The usual stuff can be found on the back, and overall the sheets have a nice clean design, complete with little touches that will keep play flowing more smoothly and keep you focused on who's going to keep you alive. Each of the 6 sheets provided in the packet is set for the 1920s. As that is also the primary focus of the core rules, that's not really a surprise. The sheets are great for photocopying and should survive a long time. Next in the packet are 2 maps for scenarios, but I'm not going to show them to you. Instead, let's actually take a look at the screen. Now here it is sitting on top of Nameless Horrors for reference. Nameless Horrors is a normal size RPG book. You can see how thick it is. It's a nice, solid, modern screen. Focus. Okay. It's a 3-panel, not 4-panel screen, which is nice, and it's in landscape. So let me get everything out of the way here, and we'll line it up. I have to say the screen knocks it out of the park. Screens can be distracting, or they can focus on an element of play which is less representative of what the game turns out to be as a whole. But this one, combining the sense of horror, the sense of investigation, and having an ability to remain muted through all of that. It's not distracting or garish, it simply does its job. Now, screens in landscape are more and more common these days, not in portrait or book size as they used to be. So we have this long panorama of an investigation in a forgotten area, and I find it very atmospheric and appropriate. And even better, there's no game advertisement information to mar it. Now on the inside, it's highly functional. I find a lot of screens tend to err on the side of putting useful information for people who aren't familiar with the system right up front. That's not a mistake that this screen has made. There's a good blend of rules references, flowcharts, things that you're going to use all the time, and things that you won't want to look for when you need them, but you'll need them. Like for collisions or bouts of madness. Things that you'll want to get right, but not want to break the flow of the game to access. They're right here on the screen, which is cool. Presented in a style very similar to the spot rules of past editions, with the exception of this. Call of Cthulhu 7th edition has flowcharts. They're quite helpful. It's just a little odd to see. The view from inside the screen is expansive. Everything is quite nicely laid out. Looking down the left panel, we have a lot of combat information. Down the center panel, we have the flowcharts for combat and dealing with insanity. And then down the right panel, we have spot rules for important things. It's really quite a good design. Now behind the screen you'll be using dice, lots of dice. Here are my Orient Express dice. I'm looking forward to breaking them out. But with the bonus and penalty dice thing, you're going to need to match them with another set. This is another Q Workshop set. This is their steampunk themed one, which I find matches nicely with the Orient Express dice. I'm looking forward to seeing what the official Call of Cthulhu dice end up actually being like. I'm sure it'll be similar to those. The way that the dice mechanic works, particularly for percentages, means you'll be needing a tens die, a units die, and then 1 or maybe 2 more dice for the bonus or penalty dice. And I think using colors is a very good idea. You can have a match set for your standard roll, then choose something ominous and obviously threatening for the penalty. And for bonus dice, you can stick with the same theme or try something that looks a little more positive. In a game like this, visuals and tactile sensations matter. So some out there might like a set like this, Tiger's Eye. So let's review what we've looked at. We have 2 scenario maps. They're double-sided, full color. I'm not going to look at those. We have these 6 glossy, heavy paper character sheets. We have the 3 large-size maps, Map of the World, Lovecraft Country, and Arkham. We have the Keeper reference notes, which, once again, I think were a fantastic idea. We have the 2 scenario booklet, Blackwater Creek and Mist Dews. And not going to look inside it either, but to show you the length of it, we have 92 pages of scenario. So not bad at all for a Keeper screen pack. Returning all this stuff to the slipcase can be a little challenging, and some people might choose not to use the slipcase for this function. But remember, it came with the kind of dust jacket overlay. If you lay the slipcase down flat and rewrap the package in that overlay, you can slide it in nicely and put the books in after. And then it will be just as firm and look just like it did when you first got it. Like this. Let's move on to the core books. You can see that the Keeper's Rulebook is noticeably larger, and this is no mistake. You're intended to be able to run the game with just the Keeper's Rulebook. And I'll go through a few chapters here just to show how they are similar and different. Now, the pages are watermarked and designed to make you feel like you're handling a manuscript, which is an effect I appreciate, but I appreciate more the continuation of this Chaosium tradition, the clear credit given. Now, as we move on to the table of contents, the presentation style has the chapter header and some important things that you may be looking for in a hurry. So this is fairly useful. Maybe the Keeper's reference that comes with the screen might be more useful if you're looking for something that you don't access very often, that isn't a major topic. But this is a serviceable table of contents, all things considered. The book exceeds 440 pages. In the PDF, it gets up to 448, including the ads at the back. So you're not going to find everything represented here on these 2 pages. There is an index at the back, starting on page 422 of the print edition and 426, I think, of the PDF. Like with any game book, I think learning the chapter order is perhaps the best way to navigate the book if you intend to use it at the table. As is being shown in unboxings all over the internet, this is a very colorful book with 2-page full color images marking the start of each chapter and a lot of other full color art scattered throughout the book. The major theme would be of a scrapbook or an investigator's journal. The theme isn't maintained purely because we have these full pages of art and we focus in on real world items such as the themed dice, but all in all, for a practical document used for learning the game, the theme is quite nice. Now, as we go through, we see the font is pretty large. It's quite usable. The gloss of the pages is low. The page count from the early chapters is also not that high, so you move very quickly through some specific concepts. We still have the standard 2-page Investigator cheat sheet, and then very detailed descriptions of what each step means. Experienced keepers will find a lot of it very familiar and then find other things to fly directly in the face of their experience. Regardless, the keeper will be able to use this book and this book alone to either guide the group in creating their characters or to make characters of their own. All right. Now, we're going to see some of this information, such as this chart, again in the Investigator's Handbook, but layout is different and the selection of information is different. You're not going to find as detailed a write-up on sanity, for example, in the Investigator's Handbook as here, and of course you won't find the mechanics discussed in as great detail there as here. But there are pages, charts, or sections of text which appear in both, one way or another. Now, Chapter 8, the Sanity chapter, is one of my favorites. This is a standout chapter for me in the new Call of Cthulhu, keeping, as it does, very close ties to what was originally developed, but then expanding it in new ways and very helpful ways, including, but not limited to, these optional rules. Nice work there. That's enough of a look through the Keeper's Rulebook to get a sense of it. Let's compare with the opening of the Investigator's Handbook. Now it's a much lower page count, clocking in at under 300 pages, so it's roughly the size of what Call of Cthulhu had grown to in its 6th edition, and significantly larger compared to what the game was in earlier editions. The pages are a different color from the Game Master's Guide, but are watermarked and stained in appropriate ways to still give you that feel of a journal or some kind of in-world document. This always gives me pause every time I see it. All right, so we move through. We get to the table of contents. I'm going to come back to it later. You might have recognized that piece of art from the Game Master's Guide. The chapters are laid out the same way. Okay, so we have a consistent theme between books. But when you've got a book open on the table, even if you can't see the cover or you're looking at it from a distance, you can tell which one's which. Some of the reused art is used very differently. We get a better look at the dice, for example. But there's a lot of new art, with both books giving you a lot of different imagery. The fiction choice for 7th edition is a departure. Traditionally, we've had the Call of Cthulhu as the story that is included with the game. However, some feel that the Dunwich Horror better represents what investigators actually do in the game, and there's legitimate arguments for this. Unfortunately, there are legitimate arguments that Call of Cthulhu as the story is similarly appropriate for helping players get a sense of what the game world is like and what it is that they should be doing. It also has the advantage of working as an in-world document that players might discover and be motivated to move forward from. However, looking through these pages, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of familiar charts and whatnot from the Keeper's Rulebook, such as this. However, there is also a lot of new material, and the way things are presented is organized differently. This is the book for players. It focuses on things like the 1920s. It focuses on how to represent your skills, what to expect or how to conduct an investigation, and that sort of thing. Strange decision was having the size chart in there, but maybe not so strange from some points of view. I really like the chapter on the 1920s, as I mentioned in the unboxing. And going through the Investigator's Handbook, every page has ideas and gets you ready for adopting the role or roles of investigators in this very challenging and interesting game. Now let's go back to the table of contents as I mentioned. Here you can get a sense of the type of player-focused information is provided in the handbook. We start with the introduction to the game, the story, creating your character, move into occupations and skills, then organizations as it says. The sheets are at the back, and the main part of the book, the most interesting part of the book for me, life as an investigator, the setting focusing on the 20s, advice for players, and then of course, the reference section. Some people are reacting to this like it's new. Of course, it's been in the game for a long time, but it's never, ever looked like this. To round out this look at core products, let's go back. This is the 5.6 hardcover edition, and this is the 4th edition. And we'll just take a look at how Call of Cthulhu has changed over the years. One of the things is that this hardcover book, when I bought it when it was new, cost me $59.95 Canadian in my friendly local game store. So, you'll note there are similarities in the layout here. This is, what we are used to seeing when we open a Call of Cthulhu book. Keep in mind that this is an all-in-one book. So, as we take a look, we start with the Call of Cthulhu, the classic story that starts it all. Then we move through the game system. We explain how it all works in context of creating your investigator, following that up with spot rules for just about everything. These are what appeared on the screen. We then get into references, how to understand the setting, how sanity is going to work. We then move into a list of magic. Then there's some classic scenarios, and then what's called utilities, or references to the 20s, the 1890s, the 1990s, different timelines for disasters, Fortean events, the 100 Years timeline, some humor, some ready-to-play investigators, and then sheets for your players. There's a lot of stuff packed into this 300-page book. For old hands, navigation through these books was easy, and as a lot of it was recycled or reused or reimagined sometimes, it was pretty much like going through the same book again and again, but finding surprising new art or a cleaned up bit of text, or that sort of thing. The organization for a newcomer, I suspect, is more than a little challenging. And remembering what it was like with my first copy, you can see it in the corner there, 4th edition, my first copy of the rules, I was baffled why it was organized the way it was, until I got the 3rd edition and discovered that it had originally been several small booklets, which had just been compiled together under one set of covers. This edition and the 6th edition to follow would break that pattern somewhat. The 4th edition, well, this is still the one I have the most feeling for, as I discovered a lot about myself and about gaming using it. And again, we see the same familiar kind of approach to our introductory page. Same old names. Table of contents, here it was approached from a very completionist point of view. Pretty much everything you might find in the book is here on the table of contents. Everything. Over the years, a tremendous amount of reference material and resource material has been brought into the core book, and it has slowly, little by little, grown. But this edition of the game is less than 200 pages. Of course, the very tiny font certainly helps. Now, the whole game isn't the font that you're looking at now, but in places it's close. Flipping through these two older editions, you can see what strides forward in graphic design we've made in the last 30 years or so, and what Chaosium has been able to do as a result of this massively successful yet ultimately challenging Kickstarter campaign. To have 2 full-color rulebooks of the quality of these book plates is impressive. Now, the 4th edition had this fantastic timeline for the 1920s and was filled with all kinds of things that set my brain on fire. Not only did it include poetry and these weird Lovecraftian style or Fortean events, the mythos prehistory and things, but it's just little things, the prices, the travel times, how hard it was to communicate, what prisons were like around the world in the 20s, brand names and this sort of stuff, which set me on a path to find old catalogs and old advertisements from days gone by to get a sense of how things develop. I think Call of Cthulhu is responsible for that interest in me. A major selling point of 7th edition is the vehicle chase rules. And before we get there, take a look at this cool inclusion of different mythos terms in different languages. But anyway, moving to the chase rules. These are in the 4th edition. It's 2 pages, and it's focused specifically on auto chases and combats while in cars. This sort of thing is fun, and it's easily extrapolated out to other kinds of chase. It gives you a way to look at, I guess, narrating and constructing a chase so that the players have the freedom to act and react to what's going on, but you can keep track of the important things as the keeper to make sure that there's still challenge and that you have a sense of where everybody is. This little chart that you're looking at is really all that you needed. Once you'd internalized it, you could use it for a lot of different things in a lot of different games. Now, 7th edition takes the approach of teaching people how to organize and think of chases as dramatic set pieces, and that's something entirely different that wasn't touched on in earlier editions. It's a different design approach from the keeper's point of view. Now, what we're looking at is the inside of the 6th edition screen. You're going to see a lot of familiar stuff. The 7th edition screen definitely retains a lot of the ease of use and clarity that we see on this screen. If you've heard that the editions are all compatible with each other and you have access to an older screen and are wondering how useful it will be for you, well, take a look at this one and take a look at the one presented earlier in the video and compare. The resistance table, which takes up pride of place on earlier editions' screens, it's no longer a factor of 7th edition. It's been replaced by actually doing opposed rolls instead of simulating opposed rolls as it does, so cleanly and quietly. Both screens have a lot going for them. For any previous edition of Call of Cthulhu, I think I would go with this one, but for running 7th, I would side with using its own, although I'm going to miss that range and size chart quite a bit. I think in the screens we can see the great amount of similarity and the subtlety of the changes. Now, let's just take a look at the outside just for old times' sake. Done like a period photograph of yet another desolate place with strange standing stones and some intrepid investigators waiting to see what they'll discover. One of the better screens out there. I think soundly beaten by 7th. So this brings us to the end of the overview of the core products for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. The Keeper's Rulebook, the Investigator's Handbook, and the Keeper's Screen and the packet inside the screen. For a look at the other 2 books, check out our unboxing. Thank you for watching. I hope it has been of use.